Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Bansi Mehta, who is the CEO and founder of Kuro UX Design. Hey, Bansi, how are you doing?
Very well, and I'm excited to be here. How about you, Adrian?
I'm doing very well. In fact, I would go so far as to say I'm splendid. So, Bansi, for the benefit of our listeners and people that read the highlights of these interviews, can you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So, to give a little bit of background about myself, I come from a small town in India. I was born and raised there, and currently I'm living in Pune. I am a computer engineer by education, but a designer at heart and by profession.
Mm-hmm.
So I started this company called Kuro UX Design back in 2011 when user experience was just becoming a buzzword internationally and was still very new in India. But my experience as a designer working with different clients and projects told me that while consumer products tend to get the best out of UX, enterprise products could benefit from it even more. Mm-hmm. And with this belief, I started Kuro, and this is the belief that drives us to work with enterprises across the globe, where we help them overhaul and define the UX for their products by adapting user-centric thinking.
Perfect. Now, we in setting up this podcast, we kind of discuss a whole bunch of things that we'll get into. But I mean, I just wanted to also before we get into them, before we get to dive into some of these themes and these issues that we wanted to talk about, I just wanted to say, we're now almost 12 months into this global pandemic, and just want to say, how are you, and how's the last year been for you?
Well, it's funny, this question, Adrian. How are you? It had almost lost its meaning, and all of a sudden, in last year, it became the most meaningful thing to ask. And every time you would ask people, you will get real, deep, meaningful answers. So when you ask me what comes to my mind when I look back, for me personally, it was a mixed year with quite a bit of highs and lows. Mm-hmm. It started with a strict lockdown for me, which meant to be at home all the time, to be with entire family all the time, and to take charge of cooking, cleaning, taking care of yourself, home, and while doing all of this, also figuring out the remote element of work. Yeah. For me, my entire career has been working from office, and it was like we went remote overnight and 100% remote. So that was a bit of a surprise and a shocker, but I was really amazed at how adaptive human spirit is, how we change as the context changed. be it remote UX workshops, daily commute reducing to zero, a new protocol of travel altogether, or the dramatic spike in online shopping.
Mm.
So many things got completely transformed for me and around me, and it got altered in less than a year. So quite an interesting and impactful year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can relate to a number of those things that you kind of that you've said. One of the things that you said about this kind of the spike in online shopping, I mean, because one of the first things that we were talking about is this. You mentioned that the idea that user experience has become ever more important, especially with this massive rush to digital, and we've seen the massive spike in e-commerce. I mean, what does that mean in practical terms? The user experience has become more important than ever. I mean, what does that mean in practical terms?
So you are very right, Adrian, when you say that businesses are and businesses were rushing to digital. And to stay, in my experience, that entire rush is to stay relevant since the context changed dramatically in 1 year. And
Mm.
it changed so fast that rushing, for so many businesses, rushing meant surviving. So
Yes.
I personally saw a spike from many of our existing and new clients where they needed something to be designed and delivered fast.
Mm.
The window of opportunity was narrow with so much at stake. So to give you an example, we overhauled a telehealth solution in as little time as 2 months that eventually recorded a whopping 10 million minutes per month usage.
Wow.
So you can imagine the scale, the impact and reach, and it's healthcare, so you can't go wrong. But it was a desperately needed solution. So we didn't have all the time in the world. The rush was understandable, but what I found the key to deliver high on customer experience
Mm.
is to be able to stay nimble, to
Right.
be able to iterate fast and iterate continuously, creating a feedback loop, if you say.
Yeah.
that that way, we are not waiting months before go to market, but at the same time we are committing ourselves to iterate and improvise fast and release subsequent versions with equal zeal. So that's what to me it means to rush into digital while still caring for user experiences, because yes, with everything being remote, people are more isolated, they are more in the bubble and shell, and it's very hard to empathize when you are not seeing your users, your customers, your co-workers for that matter.
Mm.
And the user experience becomes even more important in this context, because the environment in which a particular person works that has a very great impact on the experience, on the UX, when they interact with a product or a system or application.
Yep.
So that with the pandemic, it became ever more important than before.
Perfect. I mean, so I mean, we've seen up that as you say, they've seen people that have stayed had to stay nimble and iterate fast. So they're reducing their, if you like, they're experimenting all the time. I guess they're
Right.
reducing their sample sizes in terms of kind of what they kind of like need to kind of like test, or how much data they need to test to be able to learn something, and then to kind of change something and then create the next, if you like, hypothesis or test, and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. So you're absolutely kind of like right. I mean, but within all of that, I guess there must be some big kind of learnings around how UX is changing, and there must be some sort of like, from that there must be some lessons that we can draw out, that could be drawn out around what brands and organizations should be paying attention to, because I guess many of these digital channels and many of these applications and many of these products have never been put under so much pressure and scrutiny as before.
Right, absolutely. So in general, the things which are changing and which brands should pay attention to. One of the things is the rise of intuitive design that makes people's lives easier.
Right.
It is becoming more and more accessible for example, when you see Google Maps changing color from light to dark inside the tunnels, and then again going back to light when the tunnel is over, that is intuitive, right? That is seamlessly integrating based on the user's environment without much of an interference or input from the user themselves. So being mindful that more and more users and people are experiencing intuitive design around them in their life poses the opportunity as well as challenge, which organizations should be mindful of. Along
Right.
with that, another thing that I can think of is a rise of micro design communities. But
Okay.
thanks to popular forums like WhatsApp, Quora, Slack, where people are getting education about design and having a quality and open discussion in curated small groups. This means that eventually we will see more and more awareness in terms of designing meaningful and beautiful experiences. In general, better and greater awareness in terms of design and tools and processes around that. So that will definitely manifest into again a rise of intuitive design around us. And lastly, I would say that UX is no longer a good to have, but it has become a must have due to the rise in number of both enterprise as well as consumer applications.
Hmm.
And it's no longer just a competitive factor or selling factor alone. It has, it also showcases a company's value system. And that is something that brands should really care about. Like, for example, accessible design or caring for the users truly. For example, when Netflix shows message asking users if they are sure they want to watch the next episode when they've been binging for too long.
Right.
Now that's thoughtful, right? That's truly caring for users. So going beyond and truly caring and showing these gestures in the user experience, in the interface, in the product, all of this.
So I guess within that last part as well, because again, the before all of this, you would see. So those are techniques that you mentioned, Netflix. Those are techniques that they and also other people have used that come from, behavioral economics, behavioral science, behavioral design, even,
Mhm.
and is encouraging people to keep to remain engaged. But now what you're saying is that almost that there's an ethical or a user care or a customer care element that's getting injected into that's guiding what people can do from a design and usability perspective.
Right, right, absolutely. And that's where brands can actually show that they care for the users. I think similar thing goes with Apple as well when they started tracking the screen time and showing and helping people in kind of controlling their exposure to screens, the
Mm,
number of times people look at notifications or check their phone is a step in that direction.
yeah. And so the other thing that I've been thinking about, and it was a challenge before the pandemic, and then it's become an even greater challenge now that many people are working remotely, as it were, and sort of living kind of in a socially distanced world for now. Because I always say that getting closer to your customers is one of the keys behind delivering a great experience, and particularly a great digital experience. But I've also been saying that isn't all about the data, but going beyond sort of the data to get this kind of visceral understanding of how customers and users are and how they interact with things. I mean, would you agree with that? And if so, how have brands been, or what have brands been doing to get closer to their customers in this kind of time? Because that obviously is like it's a completely different paradigm and therefore a massively different challenge.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. When we look at our customers or users or people per se, through purely through data, it's like looking at our employees through Excel sheet or numbers, or looking
Yeah,
at our population through numbers and Excel sheets, right? And while that may tell us some patterns and give us some trends, I think what it tremendously fails at doing is creating empathy. To
Hmm.
be able to empathize with who our customers or users really are, what their needs are, what their struggles and challenges are, what will drive them. And hence, getting closer to customers actually means connecting with them, irrespective of the logistics. And by logistics, I mean whether you are able to actually do the field study and go and meet and observe the users in person, or you do it remotely. What really counts is the effort and the mindset to put customer research and getting closer to the customers, learning about their needs at the center of innovation, at the center of the way companies and organizations create their offerings, their products, their services.
Yeah.
And while there are so many tools available out there, I wouldn't really talk about tools and process. In my opinion, getting closer to customer is the cornerstone of great customer experience. And what really matters is the commitment at leadership level.
Yeah. I
Customer
think.
centricity. Yep.
No, no, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, so customer centricity requires a mindset change at organizational level rather than mere change in tools and processes. Changing tools and processes is easy enough. Changing the mindset really requires the leadership to believe in it, to push for it. And it's hard because it's so common for the organizations to look at the customer through the lenses of the way their departments, hierarchy, and incentives are structured, to work in silos and forget that the customer doesn't really care, that sales is a different department than R&D, and product development is responsible for something else than the customer support.
Yeah.
So the commitment from the top, make sure the people responsible to deliver superior customer experiences are looking at their own product or solution from the customer's eyes, and outside in approach as opposed to inside out approach.
Yeah. I think it's when you were talking there, it reminded me of I was watching the TV with Hannah, my wife, the other day, and I saw an advert that was from Microsoft Teams. It was over on Microsoft about their Teams products, and I was like, I'm not a huge fan of Teams, but the concept behind the advert was great, because what they were talking about how the people behind the Monopoly board game had been able to use Teams to watch different people play the game across different cultures, and that allowed them to better understand, and almost in an interactive kind of way, but using chat and everything else, to try and understand, one, the difficulties they had with it, but also kind of how they could customize it or kind of like develop it to better align it with different kind of cultures and different kind of user groups, which I think is sort of like an example, now I think about it, of almost like making the time and the effort to set those things up, so you can actually bring yourself to the customer, but the physical space can be collapsed by using digital tools smartly, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what really matters is putting those customers at the center and prioritizing connecting with them, learning about them, empathizing with them, and that invariably leads to creating solutions and experiences which might not be totally out of the box, but surprisingly they are not done before.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I just jumped in there with an example that I thought that brought what you were saying to life. But I mean, I'm sure you've got a couple of examples of firms that are doing this sort of thing, or really leading on their UX and their customer understanding. So can you share a couple with us and tell me what they're doing and how they've, and how it's kind of benefited them?
Sure. One of the brands that I personally admire is Walgreens.
Hmm.
It's a pharmacy in USA, where they have always been innovative about connecting with customers and delivering superior value and service to them, One of the things that they adapted is Ask a Pharmacist series into short, informative videos that answer customers' common questions related to COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And the brand, they quickly converted an existing email campaign creative into video ad to explain how people can safely take advantage of online care services and free prescription delivery.
Right.
And finally, to help combat the challenge that many communities face with limited access to COVID-19 tests, they
Mm-hmm.
instituted drive-through testing for first responders. All of this tells that they are they are listening on both sides. They're listening in terms of the market needs and demands, and also in terms of the individual users and what would really deliver value to them, and then drafting their solution and offerings in alignment with that, to deliver superior experience.
Nice.
So that was one. And another one is something that I seek inspiration from always is Jeff Bezos' letter to stakeholders in 2013, where he says that one advantage, perhaps a somewhat subtle one, of a customer driven focus is that it aids a certain type of proactivity. And
Right.
when we are at our best, we don't wait for external pressures. We are internally driven to improve our services, adding benefits and features before we have to. We lower prices and increase value for customers before we have to. We invent before we have to. This itself is so moving and it's so true. And I think we all know that where the company is now, following these ethos, putting the customer at the heart of everything that they do.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's it's great. I think there's I love the idea that it's all about commitment, but ultimately there's commitment and then there's actually doing something. And I know that we've seen in many cases over the course of the last 12 months, the collapsing of this gap between rhetoric and activity. And I really like your idea or the reference to it's about effort. Commitment is one thing, but if you don't apply yourself, if you don't exert the effort, then you're not going to get very far. So I think they kind of I'm going to if we can do a, a thing in capital letters over on an audio sort of like through an audio kind of like medium, I would be effort in capital letters because I think that's the key here. Effort combined with commitment, it will take you a long way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, Bansi, thank you for all of that. But if I may, I wanted sort of to change tack slightly and ask you a little bit about your experience as an Indian lady who's leading a UX design studio, working with some massive brands, but competing in a traditionally very white and very male dominated technology and digitally focused kind of market. And I wanted to ask you, like, sort of how's that been, and sort of like what sort of lessons have you kind of like learned from that? Because I imagine it's probably been quite a struggle and almost might even feel like you were wading through mud or running up hills, kind of running uphill at some points. So it'd be really great to sort of to understand your perspective on that.
Well, Adrian, I wouldn't deny that I have felt unnerved on many occasions in a room full of male counterparts, bosses, and clients.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they were intimidating, but more because I come from the many cultures that teach women to avoid conflict and be docile, to
Right.
play nice. So, to be honest, when the time came where I had the opportunity to play equal, it didn't come naturally. And it's in these moments I realized I needed to push myself, to go beyond the self doubts, to ignore the discomfort that I felt in my own skin that came from the years of conditioning.
Right.
And these moments of winning the inner battle has been decisive in how far I have come, and in a way, could have come.
Yes.
On the other hand, leading a minority UX design company based in India has also taught me a lot. So, Indian IT sector has always been looked at as some place where you outsource the IT work and get things executed.
Yeah.
Now, the irony for me has been that being in the space that we are, which is user experience design, you can't design meaningful user experience by following instructions or
Mm.
by simply executing what's decided someplace else. So, for many years, we have constantly worked to ensure through our work, through our conversations, we build the trust and set expectations that we are here to work as equal partners. Surely, this required a lot of conscious efforts and commitment, but I think it was all worth it. And
Right.
I learned a lot in the process where two of the biggest lessons that I learned was one, to never undersell yourself. Your work speaks for you, and you should speak unabashedly about your work. And
Right.
on the other hand, when you speak with authority, people listen with sincerity. So, for example, even if we are an external design agency, stakeholders within enterprises do pay attention to me, my team, and value our opinion because we make confident claims and back them up with facts and evidences.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of work. It means that we do our homework, that we put that extra effort that is required, but it's all worth it.
I love the idea about be confident in your work. Well, do the work and be confident in your work, and then speak confidently about your work because then it'll speak for itself.
Right.
But I think there's also the point around unlearning some of the cultural lessons or behaviors that you can be brought up with. I think is an important kind of thing too. So, I mean, what advice would you give to other people that may find themselves in a similar position to yourself, when they're kind of thinking about their kind of they might be facing some of the same kind of like struggles or the same kind of challenges? I mean, what advice would you give to them based on your own experience?
I always take inspiration from Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In,
Right.
to remind myself and the fellow women that it's important to have the ambition to lean into your career and run the world. So work extra hard if you have to, because to make the world an equal place, be it for gender equality or ethnic minority, we need representation not only in the workforce, but in leadership roles.
Yes, I couldn't agree with that kind of any kind of like more. And there's another capital letter moment on the kind of the podcast. Say it loud and clear. Um, and so thank you, Nancy, for sharing that with me, because I always like on the podcast to try and explore sort of different sort of things and give voice to things that I care about, but are things that that and things that should be talked about. But if I was to also then switch up a little bit again, is
Mm.
can I ask you to think about the future a little bit and to think about what do you think? What do you see coming down the track in terms of the future of UI, UX, CX, all that sort of like stuff is, which is one big domain, I guess. And what do you think are some of the key challenges that the brands and organizations are going to have to face to in order to succeed?
Surely. Well, customer experience has officially joined price and product as the key brand differentiator. In fact, research shows that 84% of companies expect to increase their focus on CX measurements and metrics. At the same time, some enterprises around the world are increasing their research budget by 25% to find out user needs better.
Hmm.
This is very encouraging. Some of the trends that I'm personally excited about are to see voice interface and voice based UX to become mature, to see how AI and UX put together will unfold, and the UX of wearables. But above all, as UX practices mature and more businesses make it a part of their process and culture, it will be beautiful to see holistic and universal user experiences in more and more products we interact with in our daily lives, and
Hmm.
actually enhancing the quality of life itself.
Yeah, no, that's something to look forward to, definitely. Um, so I mean, so we talked about a bunch of things, Nancy. I mean, is there anything that we've missed out that you'd like to point out before I ask you? I've got one more kind of question that I want to ask you, then a couple of fun ones to end with. But is there anything that we've missed out that you'd like to add or to highlight before we kind of boil it down a little bit?
I would just say one thing, Adrian, that while the prospect of customer experience, the maturing user experience practices, and the promise it holds is all beautiful, we as practitioners, we have to keep it in mind that it would require for us to advocate the importance of customer experience, to put users and customers at the center again and again, to
Hmm.
remind the stakeholders and people that we work with that it is important and how it ties to the bottom line and top line, from business perspective, to make sure this happens, because it is a continuous process.
Yeah, perfect. And so, like, I mean, so we talked about a bunch of things there, Bansi. I mean, and you know how people kind of sometimes they listen to podcasts and then we might have talked about all sorts of different things. I mean, but I also like to try and boil it down because, like in many things, it's all of this advancement and progress and everything else. A lot of it's about getting started and taking the first sort of step. So for someone, if listening into this or reading the highlights, and then if they wanted to improve their service or the experience that they deliver to their customers, I mean, what would be your best advice? I mean, where should they start? What should they do first, as it were?
Well, I would say that if you are in the position to do this, make sure that the teams and structure, or the departments, if you may, within the organization is aligned to deliver end-to-end superior customer experience. Their KPIs, their incentives are aligned with that, so that teams are not stacked against each other, but they work in harmony towards one common goal. This this has a lot of power to bring about beautiful experiences. That being one of the things. And second, I would say, cultivate the respect for research and experimentation. So
Yeah.
while prioritizing what initiatives that we should work on this year, where the budget should go, instead of just going about initiatives from hunch, it is always better to actually connect with the customers and to let the customer research and insight, let that stem and say and guide what initiatives to prioritize, where to put your money in. That is the most important thing. And secondly, the experimentation part, right? Unless the entire organization, top to bottom, do not commit to experimentation towards trying new things, learning, quickly testing it in the market with the users and customers, and then based on that feedback, iterating again, innovation cannot happen, new ideas cannot happen. And hence, research and experimentation, these two go hand in hand, and it has to become part of the process, part of the culture.
Perfect. I love that. Make sure you get things aligned and then
Right.
experiment like crazy. So thank you for that, Bansi. That's been great. I mean, so what I want to do is, like I've always been doing for the last sort of 12, 18 months, I've been doing this, I guess it's a bit like a piece of longitudinal social research. So you like this, it's like user research, right? Because I
Hmm.
published this new book called Punk CX a wee while ago, and I've been taking a poll and on the podcast since then, where I've been asking kind of people a couple of questions. They're like word association questions, and the first one is, what what one word would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience or user experience?
If I have to answer it in one word, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is curious. By curious, I mean wanting to know more rather than lousily working with just what we have been given.
Yeah.
Being curious about different ways of doing things rather than sticking to a given brief.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So, yeah, that's what comes to my mind. And on the other hand, I think punk CX to me really means not confronting to set standards and consistently thinking of newer ways, being a troublemaker in a sort of a way, but in a good way where we disrupt to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. I like that word troublemaker, or those two words troublemaker. And then the second one is that what company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of ethos?
One thing that we use on a day-to-day basis, and I personally admire the tool Slack. So I feel that Slack is a pretty good example of punk communication tool. So unlike the common standards set by Gtalk and Microsoft Teams and other older team communication tools, Slack brought a fresh approach designed for younger generation just starting their journey in the workforce, and they challenge the status quo in so many ways, in a punk way. So that's one example that I can think of. And another one is again something that I use a lot and also contribute on is a medium. So Medium as a platform they have kind of adapted this approach where moving away from how things have always been done in terms of a platform where people can easily write and read articles that look professional. And the UI style was very new for their time. And for a content company that works only on the subscription model, that was a bold business choice to make.
Perfect. No, I think so. I think that both Slack and Medium have both had their their own massive impacts. So thank you for sharing those answers with me. That I'll add them to my list. But lastly, I just want to say to you, Bansi, first of all, thank you for sharing your time and your insights and your experience with me, and also congratulations on your success to date, and by the fact that you're tearing it up in the UX space. I think that's kind of awesome, and I salute you and wish you all the very best in all your future endeavors. But just finally, thank you for coming and being a guest on the podcast today. That's been awesome.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for inviting me. I feel that we are all part of the moment, and I'm only happy to play my part, play my role in this moment. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.